There's a kind of silence that settles over a search when everyone has finally admitted, quietly to themselves, that they are no longer looking for a person. They are looking for a body. That silence had settled over Ashcombe County 11 days after Eleanor Voss disappeared. She was 54 years old. She was a founder and chief executive of Voss Meridian, a biomedical company that had, over 22 years, grown from 4 employees in a rented lab space to a corporation worth more than $9 billion. She had testified before Congress twice. She had been photographed shaking hands with 3 different presidents. Forbes had put her on a cover once, standing in a white lab coat with her arms crossed, the headline reading, "The Woman Who Won't Stop." That headline would come to mean something different by the end of this story than it meant when it was written. On the 9th of October, Eleanor Voss had taken a weekend at a lake house she owned in the mountains, alone, without her assistant, without security, without her phone charger, a detail that would matter more than anyone realized at the time. She told her housekeeper she wanted quiet. She told her daughter, in a text message sent at 6:14 that evening, that she needed to think. She did not say what she needed to think about. Her daughter did not ask. That, too, would matter. By Monday morning, when Eleanor had not called in for the executive meeting she never missed, her assistant contacted the county sheriff's department. By Monday evening, her car was found at a trailhead 11 miles from the lake house, parked neatly, keys gone, a single hiking pole left leaning against the driver's side door as if she'd meant to come back for it. She did not come back for it. What followed was, by every official measure, a serious and well-resourced search. The county called in the state police. The state police called in a helicopter with thermal imaging. Volunteers came from 4 towns over, nearly 300 of them by the 4th day, walking grid lines through forests so dense that a person could stand 10 feet away and be invisible. Cadaver dogs worked the ravines. Divers checked 2 reservoirs. A private security firm, hired by Voss Meridian's board of directors, worried, some said, more about stock price than about Eleanor herself, brought in its own search teams and its own drones. 11 days, 0 confirmed sightings, 0 physical evidence beyond the car, the pole, and a single boot print half a mile up the trail that may or may not have been hers. On the 12th day, the sheriff stood in front of a small cluster of reporters and said the words that search and rescue coordinators dread saying and families dread hearing, that the operation was transitioning from active search to a recovery posture, that the terrain, the elapsed time, and the coming cold front made the likelihood of finding her alive extremely low, that the department was grateful to every volunteer, and that the search, as an active operation, was over. 300 volunteers went home. The helicopter was reassigned. The private security teams packed their drones into cases and drove back to city. Their contract fulfilled, their invoice sent. Ashcombe County exhaled and went back to its life, the way small places do after tragedy passes through and keeps moving. Nobody official was looking for Eleanor Voss anymore, but one man was about to start. His name was Daniel Reyes. Most people who knew him called him Doc, a nickname he'd earned 14 years earlier as an Army combat medic in a unit that lost more men than any family back home would ever be told the truth about. He was 51 years old, built like a man who had spent 3 decades being useful with his hands, and he rode with a small, tight-knit motorcycle club called the Ridgeline Riders, based out of a converted feed store on the edge of a town so small it didn't have a stoplight. The Ridgeline Riders were not what television had taught America to expect from a motorcycle club. There were 19 full members. 6 were veterans, 4 nurses or EMTs. 1 ran the only auto shop in 3 counties and fixed cars for free for anyone who showed up in a uniform. They did toy drives in December and search and rescue support in October, when hunting season sent lost hikers into the hills with predictable regularity. They had, in fact, been part of the volunteer effort for Eleanor Voss from day one. Doc himself had walked 11 miles of grid line in the first week, boots soaked through, radio silent, except for the occasional crackle of another search team calling a false lead. When the sheriff announced the search was over, most of the Ridgeline riders did what everyone else did. They went home. They grieved a stranger the way small communities grieve strangers who become. For a little while, everyone shared concern. They moved on. Doc did not move on. To understand why. It helps to understand what brought him to that feed store clubhouse in the first place. Because it wasn't the reason most people assume when they see a man his age on a motorcycle. Daniel Reyes had grown up 2 towns over, the son of a long-haul trucker and a school cafeteria worker, and he'd enlisted at 19 mostly, because college was a realistic option, and the recruiter had made a promise about training that turned out, against all odds, to be true. He became a combat medic. He was good at it. The kind of good that gets noticed, the kind of good that gets you moved forward into situations where being good matters more and more, until one day it matters more than any 20-year-old should have to carry. There was a day, in a valley whose name he still would not say out loud to strangers, when Daniel Reyes made a call under fire about who to treat first, and made it correctly, by every rule of triage he'd been trained to follow, and a young man he'd trained beside for 8 months died anyway, 20 minutes after the point where Doc's decision had already been made and could not be unmade. He came home from that war with medals he didn't talk about in the conviction, buried somewhere under the parts of him that functioned normally, that he had personally witnessed the exact moment where trying stopped one heartbeat too early. He never fully forgave the war for that math. He also, somewhere in the 15 years since, had made peace with a specific promise to himself, that in his own life, on his own watch, he would never again be the reason effort ended before it had to. It wasn't heroism, not at first. It wasn't even, if he was honest with himself, entirely about Eleanor Voss. It was something quieter and harder to explain, a discomfort that sat in his chest like a stone he couldn't put down. He had learned in the Army, in the worst year of his life, that there is a specific kind of failure that happens not because people stop trying, but because people stop trying too soon. He had watched men die because a search was called off 6 hours before it should have been. He had spent years afterward turning that fact over and over, the way you turn over a stone looking for what's underneath it. He was not going to let it happen again, not if there was anything he could do. So on the 13th day, the first day of what the county was now calling recovery posture, the first day nobody official was walking those hills, Daniel Reyes got on his motorcycle at 5 in the morning, rode to the trailhead where Eleanor Voss's car had been found, and started walking. He told no one where he was going, not even his club. Not yet. He wasn't sure at that point that he had anything worth telling. His wife, Carol, had asked him at 4:45 that morning, watching him lace his boots in the dark kitchen, whether he really thought he was going to find something 300 trained searchers and a helicopter hadn't. He hadn't had a good answer for her. What he'd said instead was the truest thing he had. Probably not. But I keep thinking about her family getting a phone call telling them everybody quit, and I can't make myself be part of the reason that phone call happens today instead of some other day, if there's even a chance it doesn't have to. Carol, who had been married to him for 22 years and understood by now which of his instincts were worth arguing with and which weren't, made him a thermos of coffee and told him to check in by radio every 2 hours. And that was the entire conversation. It was, in its way, its own quiet act of faith, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply hands a man his coffee and lets him go do the thing he needs to do. Here is something the search coordinators knew, and something worth understanding, because it explains almost everything that happened next. A professional search operation, however well-resourced, is built around probability. Searchers walk the routes a lost person is statistically most likely to have taken. They prioritize trails over untracked forest. They search outward from the last known point in expanding rings, weighted toward the terrain an average person, under average stress, would choose. Eleanor Voss was not an average person, and by every account from those who knew her best, she had not been under average stress that weekend. She had been under a different kind of stress. The invisible kind, the kind that doesn't show up on a missing persons report. What nobody outside her closest circle knew, and what would only come out much later, was that 6 weeks before she disappeared, Eleanor had been diagnosed with a neurological condition that was slowly and without much warning beginning to affect her balance and her short-term memory. She had told no one at the company. She had told no one on her board. She had not, in fact, fully told herself. She had scheduled a follow-up appointment for the week after a trip to the lake house, still deciding, in the private architecture of her own mind, whether to believe what the first test had shown. She went to mountains that weekend not to rest, but to walk, because walking, for Eleanor Voss, had always been how she thought. She had built a $9 billion company by walking, pacing hallways, pacing hotel rooms before board meetings, pacing the halls of hospitals where her company's medicines were tested on people whose faces she made herself remember. She went into those hills to walk off a diagnosis the way she had walked off every hard thing in her life, and somewhere past the second mile, her balance failed her on a slope steeper than it looked, and she fell. She did not fall onto the trail. She fell into a ravine choked with brush, 20 feet below the tree line, invisible from above, invisible from any drone flying the standard search pattern, invisible from any dog whose handler kept it for safety to the marked trails. She broke her ankle in the fall. She could not climb back out for 11 days, while 300 volunteers walked grid lines a quarter mile away, while a helicopter with thermal imaging flew overhead and read nothing but the warm bodies of deer and the cooling stone of the ravine walls. Eleanor Voss survived on rainwater collected in the crown of her own hat and on whatever her body had left to give. She was, on the morning Daniel Reyes started walking, still alive, barely, but alive. To understand how she survived 11 days at all, it helps to understand who Eleanor Voss had been before any of this happened. Not the boardroom version of her, not the magazine cover version, but a version that had grown up the daughter of a nurse in a town with one traffic light, watching her mother work double shifts and come home too tired to speak, and deciding at 11 years old that she was going to build something that made medicine reach people faster than it had reached her own family. She had gone through college on scholarships and work nights. She had started Voss Meridian in a rented lab with 3 scientists and a business plan that 4 different banks had rejected before the 5th one reluctantly said yes. She had built the company. In other words, the same way she survived that ravine, by refusing to accept that a closed door was a final answer. It was the same stubborn architecture of mind that made her walk off a diagnosis in the mountains in the first place. And it was, in the end, the same stubbornness that kept her rationing rainwater and talking to herself in a scraped, cracked voice just to prove to her own body that she was still a person capable of speech. For 11 days, waiting for someone who had no idea she existed yet. Doc did not know any of this. He knew only what 14 years of medicine and a lifetime of riding through country most people only saw from a highway had taught him about how people actually move through wild terrain when something goes wrong. He had a theory, one he hadn't shared with the official search teams because nobody had asked him and he hadn't pushed. A mistake, he would later admit, that cost precious days. His theory was simple. Official searches trust trails. People, especially people in distress, don't always stay on them. He also knew something about ravines that the drone operators, for all their expensive equipment, hadn't fully accounted for. Thermal imaging reads heat signatures from directly above, a body tucked against a rock wall, in shade, partially covered by brush in its own stillness, can read as background noise, especially 11 days in, when a person's body temperature has dropped from shock, exposure, and dehydration to levels that no longer stand out sharply against the surrounding stone. Doc walked the trail for 2 hours before he did something that felt to him like common sense, but that no official search plan had prioritized. He left the trail entirely and began working the terrain just off it, in the places a person could fall, without ever being seen from above. This is worth pausing on, because it is one of the most important and least glamorous truths about search and rescue, one that search professionals themselves will tell you if you ask them honestly. The difference between a successful search and an unsuccessful one is very often not about resources. It is about the willingness of one person to keep looking in a place everyone else has stopped looking, because the data said it was unlikely. Search and rescue statistics, real ones, drawn from decades of wilderness recovery operations across the country, show something the public rarely hears. A meaningful percentage of missing persons in wilderness terrain are found within a few hundred yards of trail, but often in terrain that standard grid searches deprioritize precisely because it seems less probable. Probability is a tool. It is not a guarantee. And every search coordinator who has ever found someone alive against the odds will tell you the same thing. The odds are a description of the past, not a prediction of the future. Doc didn't know the statistics. He knew the feeling in his chest that hadn't gone away, and he knew how to read a slope the way some men read a room. The morning gave him nothing. By 9 o'clock, he had covered 1.5 miles of off-trail ground, checking every fold in the terrain steep enough to hide a fall, calling Eleanor's name into silence that gave nothing back but the occasional startled bird. By 11, his knees ached in a specific way that reminded him he was 51 and not 25, and the coffee Carol had made him was long gone, and the doubt that had been sitting quietly in the back of his mind since 4:45 that morning had grown loud enough that he stopped once on a fallen log and seriously considered turning back. What kept him moving, he would say later, wasn't confidence. It was a kind of stubbornness that had nothing rational underneath it. The same stubbornness that had once kept him working on a soldier for 6 minutes past the point where the numbers said it was hopeless, because 6 minutes past hopeless was still, technically, not yet over. He got up off the log. He kept walking. By early afternoon, 7 hours into a solo search that no one had authorized and no one knew he was conducting, Daniel Reyes stood at the edge of a ravine he had almost walked past twice, and heard, faint enough that he thought at first it was the wind moving through dry brush, a sound that was not the wind at all. It was a voice, barely a voice, but a voice. She was curled against the rock wall of the ravine, wrapped in a windbreaker that had long since stopped being any real protection against 11 nights of mountain cold, her ankles swollen to nearly twice its size, her lips cracked, her eyes, when they finally focused on him, wide with a kind of disbelief that had nothing to do with rescue and everything to do with simple human contact after 11 days of none. Later, when she was well enough to talk about it, Eleanor Voss would describe that moment in a way that surprised almost everyone who heard it, not with words like saved or miracle, though both were accurate. She used a different word. Seen. I had stopped believing anyone was going to see me, she said. Not find me, see me. There's a difference, and I don't think I understood it until that moment. It's worth sitting with that distinction, because it says something true about more than just search and rescue. 11 days alone in a ravine will strip a person down to something very basic. Not their title, not their company, not the $9 billion or the magazine covers or the congressional testimony. Just a human being, badly hurt, wondering if the world still remembers she exists. Doc did not know, in that first moment, that he was looking at a woman worth more money than his entire county's annual budget. He knew he was looking at a person in bad shape, badly dehydrated, hypothermic, in what his medic training immediately flagged as the early stages of organ stress from prolonged exposure. He got to her side, checked her pulse, checked her pupils, wrapped her in his own jacket, and did what 14 years of training had built into muscle memory long before conscious thought caught up. He stabilized her. Then he did the second thing his training had taught him, which is that in wilderness rescue, the moment you find someone is not the moment the danger ends. It's the moment a new, more urgent phase begins. He was 7 miles from the trailhead, off trail, with no cell signal, a woman who could not walk, and a window of maybe 2 or 3 hours before hypothermia and dehydration crossed the line his training told him she might not survive. He did not have a radio to the county's search operation. There was no search operation left to radio. But he had something else. He had a phone with 1 bar of signal that came and went like a hell breath, and had 18 other people who, whatever the county sheriff believed about the situation, had never actually stopped caring what happened to a stranger in these hills. He sent one text message to the Ridgeline Riders group chat. It said, "Found her, alive, need help now." And then he sent the coordinates, and then the signal dropped, and he had no way of knowing whether the message had gone through at all. For 9 minutes, kneeling beside a woman he had never met, in a ravine 7 miles from the nearest paved road, Daniel Reyes did not know if anyone in the world besides him knew Eleanor Voss was alive. He talked to her anyway, the way his training had taught him to. Not because unconscious or half-conscious patients always hear you, but because sometimes they do, and because talking kept his own hand steady. He told her his name. He told her she'd done the hardest part already, just by staying alive this long, and that the rest of it was his job now, not hers. He told her, without knowing if it was true yet, that help was coming. It was a promise made on faith, the same kind of faith Carol had shown him with a thermos of coffee 8 hours earlier. He would spend a long time afterward being grateful that, for once, faith and fact turned out to be the same thing. It had gone through. What happened over the next 90 minutes is the part of the story that, more than any other, explains what an independent motorcycle club actually is. Underneath the leather and the engines and things outsiders assume about people who ride together, it is not a gang. It is not an outlaw fraternity built around intimidation. At its best, and the Ridgeline Riders on this day were at their best, it is something closer to what human beings have always needed and increasingly struggled to find. A group of people who show up immediately without being asked twice, because showing up for each other is the entire point of why they exist. Within 11 minutes of Doc's message landing, 7 riders were on their bikes. Within 20, a nurse named Priya Nakamura, a Ridgeline member for 6 years, an ICU nurse for 14, had pulled a jump bag from her closet that she kept packed for exactly this kind of call, though she'd never had to use it for anything this serious. Within 30 minutes, the club's unofficial search coordinator, a retired Forest Service worker named Walt Okafor, who had joined the riders after his wife passed and found in the club something to fill a silence he hadn't known how to fill any other way, was on the phone with the county sheriff's office, informing them, not asking, informing, that Eleanor Voss had been located alive and that they needed a medevac helicopter retasked immediately. The sheriff's office, to its credit, moved fast once it had real information. A rescue helicopter that had been reassigned to routine patrol was redirected within 20 minutes. But even a fast helicopter needs a clear landing zone, and there was none within 2 miles of that ravine. Someone still had to get to Eleanor, keep her alive, and either bring her out or bring the landing zone to her. This is where the Ridgeline Riders did something that no official protocol had planned for, and that, frankly, saved critical time no ambulance or hiking rescue team could have matched. 4 of them, men who had ridden that terrain for 20 years chasing deer trails and fire roads most maps didn't even show, took their motorcycles as far up an old logging road as the bikes could physically go, nearly a mile closer to the ravine than any vehicle access point the county had on file. From there, they went the rest of the way on foot, carrying a collapsible litter, water, warming blankets, and Priya's jump bag. By the time they reached Doc and Eleanor, 41 minutes after his first text message, she had been alone in that ravine for 11 days and had waited, by anyone's honest accounting, entirely too long for help that should have found her sooner. But she was no longer alone, and she was no longer waiting. Priya knelt beside her, took her vitals, started in full with hands that had done this 1,000 times in hospital hallways, had never once done it on a mountainside for a stranger the whole country had given up on. "You're gonna be okay," she told Eleanor, and meant it in the specific, professional way that trained medical people mean things, not as comfort, but as a clinical assessment she was staking her judgment on. Eleanor Voss, 11 days dehydrated, barely able to form full sentences, looked up at the 4 strangers now surrounding her, men in leather vests with patches that said Ridgeline Riders MC, men the world would have taught her, if she thought about it all before that day, to be wary of, and said the only thing she had strength to say, "Why?" Not why me, just why. Doc, kneeling beside her, checking the 4 line, gave her an answer that would end up months later, being the single most quoted line in every article written about what happened that day. "Because you were still out here," he said. "That's all it takes." The helicopter found the landing zone the Ridgeline riders had cleared with nothing but hand tools and 40 minutes of desperate, silent teamwork. A flat shelf of rock 200 yards from the ravine, marked with an orange emergency blanket, and Walt Okafor standing at its edge, waving both arms, having hiked a mile and a half faster than a man his age should reasonably have been able to move. Eleanor Voss was airlifted out at 3:52 in the afternoon, 11 days and roughly 6 hours after she left her car at that trailhead, thinking only that she needed to walk and think and be alone with diagnosis she hadn't told anyone about. She was not alone anymore. She would, in fact, never quite be alone in the same way again. Not because of the fame that followed, though there was plenty of that, but because of something that happened to her understanding of the world in that ravine, something she would spend the next several years of her life trying to explain to people who hadn't been there and couldn't fully understand it no matter how carefully she described it. At the hospital, doctor confirmed what Priya had already suspected on the mountainside: severe dehydration, a fractured ankle that had begun to show early signs of infection, hypothermia that had brought her body dangerously close to a threshold doctors don't like putting into plain language for families. She was, by every clinical measure, within a day, perhaps less, of a very different outcome. She stayed in the hospital for 9 days. Doc visited on the 3rd day, still in his riding jacket, still smelling faintly of engine oil and mountain air, and found her sitting up in bed for the first time, watching the door the way people do when they are waiting, without quite admitting it to themselves, to see if the person who saved them was real or a fevered dream from a body that had been through more than it was built to survive. "I thought I made you up," she told him. "Wouldn't be the strangest thing that happened to you that week," he said, and she laughed for the first time in 11 days, and then cried, because the two things, it turns out, live closer together than most people think. News of the rescue reached Ashcombe County before Eleanor's helicopter had even landed at the hospital, the way news does in small places, not through any official channel, but through a dispatcher who told her sister, who told the woman who ran the diner, who told everyone who came through the door for the next 6 hours. The reaction, in that first day, was not universally warm. This is worth including honestly, because it says something true about the assumptions people carry, often without examining them, about who deserves trust. A few residents, and at least one county commissioner who spoke to a local paper, questioned why a motorcycle club had been wandering the search zone unauthorized after the operation had officially closed. There was a brief, uncomfortable cycle of speculation online before all the facts were public about whether the Ridgeline riders had somehow known more than they were saying, whether their involvement was as clean as it appeared. It didn't last. It couldn't survive contact with the actual facts once those facts came out fully. A 14-year Army medic who had spent his morning off the clock and unpaid, a nurse who grabbed her own personal emergency bag from her own closet, for men who'd hiked a mile uphill carrying medical supplies because a stranger might still be alive. The county commissioner who'd questioned their involvement issued a public apology 2 weeks later at a town meeting and ended it by shaking Doc's hand in front of a room of people who applauded for nearly a full minute. Long enough that Doc, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, asked him to stop and talk about something else. "We're not owed anything for doing what anybody should have done," he told the room. "Give the applause to the search teams who walked those hills for 11 days before we ever showed up. They did the hard part. We just got lucky enough to be the ones still walking on day 12. What happened next is a part of the story that turned a rescue into something the whole country ended up talking about. Not because Eleanor Voss wanted the attention, but because she made a decision that surprised everyone who thought they understood how billionaires behave when they're grateful. She did not offer Doc money. Not at first. She offered him what she assumed, from a lifetime inside boardrooms, would matter most: a position, a title, head of a new philanthropic search and rescue initiative she wanted to fund, with salary that would have changed his life several times over. Doc turned it down, politely but without hesitation. "I don't want a job doing what I already do for free," he told her. That's not what this was. It took her 3 more visits and a conversation that ran late into a hospital evening to understand what he meant, and to understand something about herself in the process that 11 days in a ravine had already started teaching her, but that this conversation finished. "I've spent 30 years thinking the biggest thing I could do for people was build something enormous," she told him. "A company, a cure, a number on a balance sheet. That means medicine gets to more people. And I still believe in that. But nobody in that company would have walked 7 miles off trail on a hunch, on a day everyone else had already gone home." "That's not a criticism of your company," Doc said. "That's just 2 different jobs. Yours moves a world an inch for millions of people at once. Mine moves 1 person all the way. Both matter. Neither one replaces the other." It was Eleanor, in the end, who found the shape of what she actually wanted to do. Not a job for Doc, but a fund, seated with some large enough to raise eyebrows even among people using 9-figure numbers, built specifically to support volunteer search and rescue organizations and independent community groups like the Ridgeline Riders across the country. Better equipment. Thermal drones donated to counties too small to afford their own training grants. And something Doc insisted on over her initial objections, funding specifically earmarked for searches that had already been officially called off, so that families facing the same recovery posture announcement that Eleanor searchers once faced would have resources to keep looking. If someone, somewhere, still believed there was reason to, she named it over Doc's strong objection, the Ridgeline Fund. He told her that was ridiculous, that 19 people who happened to own motorcycles didn't deserve their name on something that size. She told him, in the tone of a woman who had built a $9 billion company by not losing arguments she cared about, that this was one decision that wasn't up for negotiation. It would be easy and dishonest to end this story with only the parts that feel good. The rescue, the gratitude, the fund, the friendship that grew against every statistical likelihood between a billionaire CEO and a retired combat medic who fixed motorcycles for a living. That version is true, but it isn't complete. What's also true is that 11 days is a long time for a human body to survive exposure and dehydration in mountain terrain. And Eleanor Voss did not walk away from that ravine unchanged. Her ankle healed, slowly, with a metal plate and a limp that never fully disappeared. Her neurological condition, the one she'd gone into those hills to think about, alone, the one nobody else had known she was carrying, did not go away either. She went public with the diagnosis 8 months later, in a statement that surprised her board and her shareholders and, in its own quiet way, became almost as widely discussed as the rescue itself. "I spent my whole life being the person who solved problems for other people," she said in that statement. "I nearly died because I didn't know how to ask for help solving my own." I want to say clearly to anyone reading this, there is no title, no net worth, no company that makes you exempt from needing other people. I found that out in a ravine from a stranger who had no idea who I was and didn't care. It was the most important lesson of my life, and I'm 54 years old, and I only just learned it. It's worth pausing here, because there's a real and important lesson underneath the emotion of this story, one that search and rescue professionals across the country have spent years trying to communicate to the public. The moment an official search transitions to what agencies call a recovery posture is not, and has never been, the same thing as a scientific certainty that a missing person cannot be found alive. It is a resource decision, weighed against terrain, weather, time elapsed, and the finite reality that search teams cannot search forever. It is, in the vast majority of cases, the right and necessary decision, but it is a decision made under uncertainty, not a verdict of fact. And every search and rescue coordinator who has spent a career in this work, will tell you that the rare cases like Eleanor's are the reason organizations increasingly encourage families and communities to know that private, volunteer, and family-organized search efforts can legally continue even after an official search is ended, provided they coordinate with local authorities and prioritize safety. It is not defiance of professionals. It is, at its best, an extension of the same goal, carried by people willing to keep going a little longer than a stretched, finite public resource can afford to. That is what Doc did, not because he thought he knew better than the sheriff's department, whose 11 days of work had, in fact, been thorough, professional, and conducted by people who genuinely wanted to find Eleanor alive. He did it because the ending of an official search is not, and has never been, the ending of what one committed person, or 19 of them, might still be willing to do. There is also a harder truth sitting underneath this story. One Doc himself insisted on including whenever he was asked to speak publicly about what happened. Not every unauthorized search ended the way Eleanor's did. Search and rescue professionals will tell you, plainly, that untrained volunteers heading into wilderness terrain alone can create new emergencies rather than resolving old ones. A second missing person, a second rescue operation, resources stretched even thinner. Doc's search worked, in part, because of exactly what he was, a trained medic familiar with that terrain for 20 years, who followed his own strict rules about checking in by radio, carrying proper equipment, and turning back at a set time if he found nothing. He never once suggested that what he did was a model for anyone to follow casually. His message, every time, was narrower and more careful than that. Know the terrain, know your limits, coordinate with authorities the moment you have real information, and never mistake courage for a substitute for preparation. The mountains do not forgive the difference. In the 2 years that followed, the story of Eleanor Voss and the Ridgeline Riders traveled further than any of them expected or, in truth, entirely wanted. There were interviews. There was a segment on national television that Doc agreed to only because Eleanor asked him to, and only on the condition that the segment spent as much time on search and rescue safety education as it did on their story. There were inevitably offers for books, for documentaries, for a dramatized television series that Doc turned down flat, and that the rest of the club, by unanimous vote, agreed with him about turning down. "We didn't do it to be on television," Walt Okafor said, when a reporter pushed him on why the club kept declining the bigger opportunities. "We did it because a woman was still out there." That's the whole story. Everything after that is just people trying to make the story bigger than it needs to be. What the club did, except what all 19 of them agreed mattered, was the Ridgeline Fund itself, which in its first 18 months helped equip 11 volunteer search and rescue teams across 4 states with thermal imaging drones that most rural counties could never have afforded on their own, and which funded continued search efforts past official cutoff dates in 6 other cases. 2 of those searches found a missing person alive, for did not every family, whatever the outcome, was given the chance that Eleanor Voss almost didn't get. Someone still looking past the point when looking was no longer statistically likely to matter. Eleanor herself began riding at 55 years old, on the back of Doc's motorcycle at first, and eventually, after a full year of physical therapy on the ankle that never quite healed right, on a bike of her own, a decision that made international headlines for approximately 1 news cycle, and that she found, privately, far more meaningful than any of the coverage suggested. She still ran Voss Meridian. She still testified before Congress. But she spent, from that point forward, 1 weekend a month riding with the Ridgeline Riders on search and rescue support missions, wearing a patch the club voted her, unanimously and over a tearful protest that she hadn't earned it, that simply said, "Found." She kept the boot print from the trail, the one investigators were never fully sure was hers, framed in her office, next to the Forbes cover with a headline about the woman who wouldn't stop. "I used to think that headline was about my company," she told Doc once, on a ride neither of them ever spoke about publicly. "Now I think it was about something else. I think it was about the fact that somebody, somewhere, has to be the person who doesn't stop looking. I just didn't know, for most of my life, that it wasn't always going to be me. Sometimes it's the person looking for you. Her relationship with her daughter changed too, in the slower, less photographed way that real change usually happens. That text message from a night before Eleanor disappeared, I need to think, had haunted her daughter through every one of the 11 days, a small unanswered question she'd been too polite or too used to her mother's independence to push on. In the hospital, on the 5th day, Eleanor finally told her the truth. The diagnosis, the fear, the reason she needed those mountains and that silence in the first place. Her daughter cried and was angry, and then was simply present in a way the two of them had rarely managed to be with each other across a lifetime of board meetings and business trips, and a mother who solved problems for a living but had never quite learned how to hand one of her own problems to someone else. They started having dinner together every Sunday after that. Neither of them missed one, not once, in the 2 years that followed. None of this made the national news. Most of the real change in this story didn't. The cameras came for the rescue, stayed for fun, and moved on long before anyone was filming the quieter parts. The Sunday dinners, the physical therapy sessions where Eleanor swore more than any CEO should probably admit to in public. The nights Doc sat in his garage fixing a stranger's motorcycle for free the same way he always had, long before any of this happened, and would keep doing long after the story stopped being news. 11 days, 300 volunteers, a helicopter with thermal cameras that read the ravine as empty stone, a search called off because the odds, by every measure anyone could point to, had turned against her, and one man who got on his motorcycle on a morning nobody asked him to, because a woman was still out there, and because he had learned a long time ago and in circumstances he rarely spoke about, that the space between unlikely and impossible is where almost everything worth doing actually happens. This has been a fictional story, but the truths inside it, about how search and rescue really works, about the gap between an official search's end and a family's need to keep looking, about what an independent motorcycle club can actually be when it's built around loyalty, service, and showing up for strangers. Those are as real as anything in this world. Somewhere tonight, there's a search that's about to be called off. And somewhere tonight, there is someone who hasn't gotten the memo yet. That's usually where the real story begins. That's the story. If it stayed with you, there's more of these here. And if you've got a minute, tell me down below who you'd want walking those hills for you.